What's poppin', my fellow rednecks and redneck enthusiasts? Today's a bit different from my normal videos because we're going to be doing an animal meat tier list. I took a list of 20 animals from cows and pigs to snakes and possums, and I'm going to be ranking them from meals you'd eat if you're feeling fancy to things you'd only eat in a survival situation. To score this as objectively as possible, I used 3 criteria to judge them. I looked at how much meat they have, the price to hunt or buy it, and most importantly, the flavor of the meat. I added the scores up for each meat, and this is the list I finally came up with. Now, I understand your list might be different. This is just after going through that experiment, so don't rip me up in the comments till you've seen the whole video. I'm going to start with the best and then work my way slowly down. First up is beef. With the best meat yield and great flavor, this was an obvious choice for S tier. Even though the price was one of the highest on the list, the flavor and yield secured it as the second highest score. So what could have possibly beaten beef? Well, deer, of course. With lots of meat on them, good flavor, and a mid-range price point, deer topped the list as the best overall meat. Pricing was tricky because deer are a little bit more expensive to hunt than other animals on the list, but it still managed to be the crowned king. But deer would actually have to share that crown because it tied with another critter. This one might come to a shock, but armadillo tied deer. Armadillo has great flavor, moderate yields, and cheap cost to hunt, making it top the list alongside deer. Armadillo has a flavor that's kind of like beef or pork depending on how you cook it, and it's my personal favorite meat on the list, so I was excited to see it all the way up at S tier. Moving on from S tier, let's look at A tier. This is for meats that are delicious but were either expensive or had a lower meat yield. And the first one up is pork. With lots of meat, good flavor, and mid-range prices, pigs were at the bottom of A tier. The price and flavor just weren't quite enough to take it to S tier. The next one on the list might not be the greatest of all time, but it is goat. Goat scored very high on flavor and meat yield, but the price knocked it down a notch. Goat burgers are phenomenal though, and I highly recommend trying this if you ever get the chance. Up next is my favorite grocery store meat, which is chicken. Chicken's cheap, has a moderate yield, and has the lowest price of all the store-bought meats. The reason it wasn't able to get into S tier is because it just isn't quite as cheap as some of the other animals, so it's roosting very comfortably at A tier. Coming up behind the chicken is one of its least favorite animals, which is a snake. That's right, with a score that outperformed chicken, snake is a delicious meat that you can get basically for free. The meat yield is what kept it from S tier, but it was smack dab in the middle of A tier. And for the last A tier meat, we have frog. As a Louisiana native, there's not much better than some Cajun fried frog legs. They're practically free to catch and delicious, but they don't yield as much meat, landing them comfortably at the bottom of A tier. Next up is B tier. This is for meats that were above average, but might have had one metric that brought them down. First up is another Louisiana favorite, alligator. Gator is delicious, but probably the most expensive on the list. Hunting them is expensive, and buying them is even more expensive. The flavor is like a mix of chicken and fish, and the yield is on the upper side of average, so it's sitting at a snappy B tier. Next up will upset you Thanksgiving fans because it is turkey. Turkeys can be hard to hunt, expensive to buy, and very difficult to raise. Flavor-wise, it is above average, but let's be honest, it's nothing to write home about. I'd still gobble it up, but I'm stuffing it into B tier. Only a couple points behind, this next one's going to surprise you because it's actually raccoon. Trash pandas have above average flavor, average yields, and low price to hunt, so it scored most consistently at the above average score. Raccoon kind of tastes like a greasier kind of pork. 1 point higher than the raccoon is actually the rabbit, which scored better in the flavor, and that's what gave it the slight edge. The next one is a swamp favorite, and that's turtle. Turtle has good flavor, but can be hard to catch and doesn't yield too much meat. Which the same can be said for the next one, which is a squirrel. Now I know this is a chipmunk, all I had was a chipmunk, that's just what I went with. Squirrels have a low meat yield, but they kind of make up for it in flavor and cheapness to hunt, so they secured themselves a nice little hidey hole in B tier. Now we're going to move on to C tier, and this is where people are probably going to get angry at me. These are the kinds of meats that are kind of just meh. There's nothing particularly exceptional about them, and they kind of just are middle of the pack, which is going to start right back in the swamp with hogs. These invasive critters are everywhere, moderately cheap to hunt, and yield lots of meat, but one major drawback is a little thing called boar taint. Boar taint happens when a wild hog is stressed at the time of death and releases a hormone that makes the meat taste and smell sour. This means that if you get a bad shot or have a stressed hog, the price and yield really don't matter because you won't want to eat the meat anyway. That being said, a clean hog can be very delicious, so it's not really fair to put it any lower. But the next animal on the list is the definition of mid. It didn't score high on yield, flavor, or cost. In fact, it was only because of being lower than average cost that it stayed out of D tier. And I'm of course talking about possum. Yes, I know this is a rat, just go with it. It has a flavor and texture like bland chicken and yields about as much meat as a rabbit. It's cheap to hunt and trap though, so it's scraping the bottom of C tier. Next up is an animal that I love to hate. It scored moderate on yield and cost, but very low on flavor, and it's been on the channel many times before, so you can probably guess that it's coyote. The meat yield is smack dab in the middle, cost is fairly low, but the flavor just isn't good. It's not bad or foul tasting, but it's very bland, tough, and not very desirable. It works well as a ground meat filler, dog food, or stew meat for gumbo, like in my roadkill gumbo video, but when it comes to flavor, it's all bark and no bite. Finally, flying into C tier is also a command when you're boating under trees. Duck is a meat that has average flavor, yields, and cost. It seems to sum up C tier well and scored higher than many others, but not enough to get into B tier. Nothing in particular was bad, but it just kind of scored average on everything. Now it's time for D tier, and to be honest with you, this surprised me a lot. Because the only animal in D tier was a quail. Yes, I know it's a dove, just pretend. Quail might be on the lower side of average price, but the yield is very small, and the flavor just didn't push it up enough to be in C tier. I personally love quail, but based on my ranking system, it flies below average. And finally, the one you've all been waiting for. What could I possibly put at the bottom of the list if armadillo somehow managed to be on the top? What could possibly be worse than possums, raccoons, and frogs? And to no one's shock, it's actually insects. Although the cheapest and easiest to acquire on the list, crickets, grasshoppers, worms, and other bugs have the texture and flavor that makes me sick. While fried grasshoppers aren't too bad flavor-wise, the texture is very hard to get past. I've eaten mealworms and a scorpion in the past, and they all have a similar texture. It's like eating the part of popcorn that gets stuck in your teeth. So needless to say, it's going down at the very bottom of the list. So that completes the animal meat tier list, and if you disagree, feel free to make your proposed corrections in the comments below. If you like these kinds of videos, let me know, and I'll make another one for like fish or maybe an insect-only type tier list. If you want to see some awesome hunting or fishing content, check out the videos here, and until next time, Jesus loves you, I love you, and have a great day.